What's up, guys? This is Mr. Eldridge, and today we're going to focus on the Age of Enlightenment. So the 18th century saw the rise of a movement known as the European Enlightenment, roughly from about 1715 to 1789. Aside from its influences in 17th century England, and its absolute disdain for monarchy at the time, the Enlightenment was influenced and most profoundly used by the intellectual ideas of the scientific revolution. Much like the scientific revolution's challenging of authority regarding ideas, so too did the Enlightenment challenge the legitimacy and the authority of its political and religious leaders. In the scientific world, the movement itself is characterized by an emphasis on reason, as well as the inherent potential of individuals to run their own lives. That idea of independent thought, rational thought, the idea that someone can make decisions for themselves. It rejected the ideas of intuition, revelation, heredity, divinity, theology, instead believing that a more open and free society would allow educated individuals to govern responsibly. To ensure good, responsible government, Enlightenment thinkers often advocated for democratic means of rule, as well as logical restrictive mechanisms to keep the government in check. That idea of checks and balances that we think of in today's modern United States political system. And so thinkers often tended to favor the protection of natural rights by the government, as well as a sense of human sameness across race and across culture. Many opposed oppressive practices such as hereditary privilege, the idea of state-enforced religion, serfdom, and slavery. And so when you think of the Enlightenment, there are two specific schools of thought in our study. First, we need to look at the English thought towards the Enlightenment. And at any point when you think of the English Enlightenment, you need to think of John Locke. One of the key forerunners to the European Enlightenment was English philosopher John Locke. Locke, like others, discussed many topics, but specifically endorsing the idea of a social contract theory. However, he placed a unique emphasis on individuals, noting that each human was born with what is often referred to as a tabula rasa, also known as a blank slate, with no innate knowledge or divine wisdom, but rather wisdom comes through experience, and all knowledge comes from that. This idea of a blank slate, a tabula rasa, was a revolutionary idea, and it challenged the traditional claim that governing authorities had divinely imbued wisdom and abilities, and that each person, being essentially equal, was deserving of the same natural rights, including among them, as he said, life, liberty, and property. He also asserted the idea that the function of society and the state was to protect these rights. And he argued that a state's legitimacy is maintained through what he referred to as the, quote, consent of the governed. This meant that these rights must be protected, and that it's paramount that these rights are being protected, and that if any state failed to protect them, the people were obligated to reform or remove that king, that leader, that government from power. Locke also argued about the idea of these specific rights, these duties, these structures. The function of the state should be explicitly bound in a little c constitution. This idea of a socially agreed upon document of what the government has and the scope of what the government has in regards to the rights of the people. You also have to look at the French thought here. And then, of course, when we think of the French thought, we think of Voltaire. Many of these Enlightenment ideals are going to spread to France and Germany during the 18th century, allowing for a wide range of thinkers to contemplate and come up with their ideas regarding this Enlightenment. And so there were other intellectuals that argued in favor of religious toleration. Voltaire is something different. He is often referred to as the most outspoken, the most infamous proponent of religious toleration at the time. He criticized the idea of a state enforcement of religion. Locke argued the enforcement of state religion causes more harm than toleration. Voltaire went a step further by suggesting that a benevolent, involved God did not exist, while also noting the religion had no empirical basis for its beliefs. Voltaire also was vehemently against the idea of religion because of religion's, what he referred to as its tainted past. The combined authority, he said that it often results in a domestic religious persecution. Some of the things that we had seen previously in world history, like the Inquisition, as well as a multitude of religiously inspired civil wars, and the conflicts that arise during the Crusades, during the 30 Years' War. And so Voltaire was deeply against the state enforcement practice of religion. And so he believed maintaining personal religious beliefs were acceptable, but the government would not be the ones that were enforcing these religious beliefs, and what becomes a tenet of the First Amendment to the United States Constitution and the free practice in the Establishment Clause in regards to religion. And so we end this lesson on the Enlightenment talking about the idea of the separation of powers. We must talk about Baron de Montesquieu. Montesquieu was a member of the judiciary, and he argued for the idea of a separation of powers, that not one government entity be more powerful than the next. He believed in this theory that, and he argued that the function of the state contained essentially three parts. That there needed to be a group that made laws, there needed to be a group that enforced and executed the laws, and you needed a group to interpret the law. And so Montesquieu believed that this would equate to fairness under the law. You need a group to determine guilt or innocence. You needed a group that's going to have the sentencing aspect. And so what we have, and what he's arguing with this, is that if you don't have a separation of powers, what we would call today checks and balances, he said that there would be major problems, that it would lead to tyranny, that it would lead to despotism. And in future lessons, especially once we get into period 3, we're going to look at that idea of despotism, of tyranny. This is going to be a major part of the Declaration of Independence and some of the phrasing that the Committee of Five is going to talk about within the context of the Declaration of Independence. He said that these three powers must be divided into three separate branches in order to ensure that no one corrupt group becomes more powerful than the next. That one entity has absolute authority and absolute power. His theories have been applied to constitutions all over the world and will serve as the basis for the Constitution of the United States of America in the summer of 1787. Thank you so much for listening in. If you've not hit that subscribe button, please make sure you do so. Thank you so much, and you have a great day.